Another edition of Behind the Lines presented by TheLines.com and BetMGM Sportsbook. It is the Championship Sunday edition of Behind the Lines, talking about the NFC and AFC Championship games with Christian Cipollini, lead trading manager over at BetMGM. Christian, looking at the NFC title game first here on the onset, the Eagles are out to juiced 6-point favorites against Washington. Total of 47.5. I want to dive into some of the trends ahead of this matchup, especially looking at how underdogs have fared on Championship Sunday. But how has the line shifted I guess, back and forth over these last couple of days?
Yeah, this one has, and it's interesting, and I still do think that we could have some movement ahead of us. We opened at 4.5, went to 5.5 for a bit, and now we're all the way up to 6. There's even a couple books out there at 6.5, so that's a good amount of line movement for a championship game weekend type of thing. Usually those get set, and they don't tend to move a lot. So that is a ton of line movement, and I do think that we might end up coming back, depending on what happens at Jalen Hurts at practice. I think there's a decent chance that he doesn't practice. I think he's going to play in the game for sure, as it seems, but if he's limited at practice or doesn't practice Wednesday, Thursday, I think there's a decent chance that this comes back down towards the Commanders. So, yeah, interesting stuff, but we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, and worth noting, I think as of Monday, that Quinyon Mitchell and Jalen Hurts reportedly didn't suffer major injuries in the divisional round against the Rams. But like you said, even if Hurts plays a non-practice on Wednesday or even Thursday would certainly impact the line, if not Wednesday by maybe a half point or so. But back to the point of underdogs on Championship Sunday. 7-3 so far against the spread in the playoffs, but since 2003, underdogs are just 20-22 ATS on Championship Sunday. The only round that they've gone below 500 in the playoffs over that 2+ decade long stretch. So you mentioned the handle, or at least the line, rising here over the last couple of days, maybe a byproduct of the positive injury news for Hurts and Mitchell, despite the Eagles not practicing so far this week. But has that been sharp action on Philly, or more so just a byproduct of early week action?
Yeah, so this is a weird one that we don't get. The sharp action has come on Philly, but more of our action so far has actually come on the Commanders. But the more respected action that we've taken, and clearly across other books as well, have seen that action. The ones that we respect has come on the Eagles. So that's why the line is moving that way, but it is one of those rare situations where it's moving against the amount of money that we're taking. So I guess more of the public is taking the Commanders, but so far the sharper ones have been on the Eagles.
Still a couple weeks away from the big game, or 2.5 weeks to be exact, I guess, as we're recording here. About 5 days out from the NFC and AFC championship games. But we know come the Super Bowl, even come this Sunday, BetMGM is going to get plenty of new bettors, especially Swifties looking to bet Travis Kelce props, and we'll dive into that ahead of Chiefs Bills. But for those who are unfamiliar with the term sharp action, I think it would behoove them and us to repeat it, even though we've stated it a bunch here on the podcast. I still think it's important to reiterate.
Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty general across a good amount of books, but we have a decent amount of customers that we have tagged and noticed that we know that when they bet, the line tends to move in their favor. And if they're betting on a Monday on a line for an NFL game, more likely than not, by the time we get to Sunday, that line will be in the direction that better bet in. So when those bettors bet, we do tend to respect their action and move along with them. And that's usually industry standard, so it's usually not just us. Usually we all get hit around the same time. A lot of times it's around key numbers, especially in football. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. It's just we have certain people that historically have been proven that we should respect them, and we do.
And that certainly has happened with the Eagles so far. But conversely, looking at the Commanders, Philly, by the way, is favored to win the Super Bowl. Washington opened the season at 150-1. And looking back they're the fourth team now to make the conference championship game at preseason odds of 150-1. Going back to 1999, the LA Rams were priced at that number or higher. They won the Super Bowl against Tennessee. the 2021 Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow. They lost in the Super Bowl to the Rams, ironically, the LA Rams and Matthew Stafford. And then one of those teams, I guess the fourth and final, if we're including Washington in that group, lost in the conference championship game, talking about the 1979 Buccaneers. Is there any liability on Washington just because of the number itself, or would it be a bonus for BetMGM if Washington pulled off the upset?
Yeah, so this is one where now we start getting into a weirder territory. From the question of liability, we actually do not have liability on the Commanders. If they are to win the Super Bowl at this moment right now, that would be a winning outcome for the book, and we'd be very happy with it. I think it's a weirder situation because while they did have really high odds, and usually a team with high odds that keeps going this far is usually bad for us, but it really doesn't seem like anybody really expected this. Even but obviously the Lions was a big upset, but we didn't take a ton of Commanders action to do that, and we weren't taking futures on them ahead of time. So I guess while some people could have seen that they may have won a game or two, there wasn't fully a full expectation, at least from a betting perspective, that they are able to win this Super Bowl. So we've been fortunate on that because, as you mentioned, their odds were very high to preseason, and then they were still really high even coming into this playoffs. So yeah, one that we're very much okay with. Although I'd say from the book's perspective, our two best outcomes are the Bills and the Eagles. So for us, that feels like the dream scenario because for one, we think it would drive a ton of handle more than a Commanders Chiefs would or Commanders Bills would. So it starts to get
More than
interesting in this
Chiefs
territory.
Eagles.
Chiefs Eagles probably not. I think Chiefs Eagles and Chiefs Bills would be the two that would get the most, and then after that is the two Commanders options from there. So
Okay. And before we get into props, I'm curious too, because we've hit on this all season long, and I think BetMGM cashed in despite underdogs maybe receiving some interest, or you could speak to that if how the results fared for BetMGM in the divisional round. But in particular, I'm sure that BetMGM was applauding the Lions result, not only from an ATS standpoint with Washington pulling off the outright upset and against the spread, obviously, but Detroit Super Bowl futures getting knocked out that early.
yeah, exactly. That win was twofold for us. One, knocking out the Lions Super Bowl futures was massive, something we needed for sure, and getting it ahead of them going to the Super Bowl was huge. The other thing that it did for the weekend was there was 4 games over this weekend that had a spread of 6.5 or more, and we knew that we needed to get one of those teams beat. So that was the Chiefs, the Lions, the Eagles, and Ohio State going into last night. We knew we needed one of those dogs to win outright because everybody was taking a parlay of those money line favorites together. So getting the Lions to lose early was just massive. And obviously, as I'd always mentioned, we end up taking more Lions bets throughout this entire season. So that trend continued into Saturday, and that was pretty much all we needed. The rest of the outcomes didn't really go our way, but that one alone was just enough to really help things. Otherwise, it could have been a disaster weekend.
God bless the Kansas City Chiefs for taking that safety with under 20 seconds to go. I was at Houston and I was very grateful. I actually, really quick story, I changed the channel from that game, as I'm sure many Texans bettors did. And I'm watching a college basketball game and I see the bottom line saying 23-14. And I'm like, how is that possible? It must be a mistake, a score mistake, a technical error. And then I go back, I look it up online. I couldn't believe it. I'm sure you guys were cheering for behind the counter.
So, believe it or not, that was actually the worst case scenario for us. We ended up moving late to Texans plus 9.5, and we ended up getting a lot of Texans action at that number. So all of our late run of action ended up being on Texans 9.5, and that actually middled us into the one number
Yeah.
we couldn't have it happen. So rare that happens, but it hit right on the bad number for us, where we ended up having to pay out all the early Chiefs bettors and then all the late Texans bettors. So hopefully that one worked out for people, but I think a lot of people put it right back into the Lions, which didn't work out.
That's a good point. I was super focused on getting that Texans plus 9.5, so I wasn't thinking about it the other way around. But middles are obviously aren't great for the book. Before we dive into player props, getting back to the NFC side of things, or at least specific props, whether it's Saquon Barkley or even the receiving yards leader for the entire postseason, I want to get into that with two NFC participants in particular. How much has, or how much have player prop action increased here over the last couple weeks. If not, I know it's only a couple days into conference championship week, but with the market getting sharper at this point, and you see it every single year. Once you get later and later into the postseason in any sport, the market becomes more and more efficient. Lines become less and less valuable, at least to quote unquote sharper betters. So over the course of the postseason, especially ahead of this week, and I'm sure the Super Bowl, if we compare player prop action versus spread and total handle, is there a little bit of a increase on the player prop side of things to maybe come closer to the spread total numbers overall, or how do you guys see it behind the counter?
Yeah, they do. So usually what tends to happen as we get into the playoff games is we end up taking lower volume on a whole as like a normal NFL week, but we do take pretty similar volume, but it just all gets plugged into the two games or the four games that we end up having. So with that, we end up getting a lot more action on the player props, first touchdown scorer, all different touchdown scorer bets. Those numbers rise and rise and rise. But to your point, it becomes easier from the book's perspective because it becomes so much more efficient, and we can also manage it much better with just a few games as opposed to a regular football Sunday where we have a whole slate of games and we're trying to figure out which games getting hit, why, injury news, weather, whatever it may be. It's a lot easier for us to focus. So we tend to do better on these games as opposed to a full slate of games. But it just ends up working out where basically people were gonna spread their money out across 6 games. They just put it into one or two now. But sometimes at a higher amount, sometimes they'll just put more bets into these specific games.
And looking at props in particular for the NFC Championship game, Saquon Barkley, who has 4 touchdowns in 2 games against Washington this season, minus 225 to tally an anytime touchdown on Sunday afternoon or late afternoon if you're on the East Coast. I know you'll be at this game. I want to get into that with you here in a second. But what's the player prop action, or which player has stood out the most for this game? Maybe outside of Barkley? And then how much action have you guys taken on Barkley to score?
Yeah, so I did just want to touch on Barkley because obviously he's the one who's getting hit
Yeah.
very hard. But we opened him at his rushing yards at over under 123 and a half, and he's already up to 136 and a half, and it might keep climbing because we're still just taking over bets on him. And as you mentioned, he ran all over the Commanders the last 2 times he played him. So I guess bettors are expecting the same from that. Outside of Barkley in that game, one that I did see from the Eagles side was Dallas Goedert over receiving yards. I guess off the back of he had a couple, dink and dunk opportunities, but his was getting hit up. And then one we talked about last week that ended up being well for bettors, the right back at it again was Dwami Brown, who had a pretty good game last week for the Commanders. His numbers are getting bet up again this week too.
I'm curious with Brown and the Commanders receivers. Now the Washington Commanders are a sizable dog in the NFC title game. So take it with a grain of salt, I guess. But when it comes to long shots in the playoff receiving yards leader market, Brown is sitting at plus 400, and I'm sure you could speak to it. He was much higher entering the postseason and then some. Terry McLaurin is the favorite at plus 150, but with Washington being a dog, probably not super valuable to bet McLaurin at this point. Travis Kelce sandwiched in between both of those Commanders receivers. We'll touch on Kelce props after we dive into or wrap up our NFC title game conversation. But is there any liability on a player like Brown? Because he's out gaining McLaurin so far by 11 receiving yards, granted. And going back to my original point, I know Washington is a dog in this game, just below a touchdown. So unlikely that Washington gets to the Super Bowl. But what kind of action and what kind of liability are you seeing in this market?
Yeah, to that point, that's why this is such an interesting market. I believe last year Baker Mayfield ended up leading the playoffs in at least passing touchdowns. He might have also led it in passing yards, despite only playing 2 games. So it can be an interesting market from that perspective of, all right, well, I'm betting this player because I think they'll get enough games to do it, or just maybe they can hold on from where they're at. We're fortunate in the Dwami Brown one is because he wasn't listed ahead of time 2 weeks ago. So we didn't take obviously any bets because he wasn't a requested player and no one really saw this coming. So we're okay right now because of the fact that we were able to avoid any 500 to 1 bets or anything like that just because he wasn't listed. Our biggest liability was St. Brown, so we're happy to have that one gone. We have some liability on Hollywood Brown also as well, and then Travis Kelce, of course, takes bets because of the name recognition. So a little bit on him. So we'd be okay with one of those commanders ending up with the most receiving yards.
And with Kelce, he had 117 against Houston in the divisional round. And we'll touch on his props right after this, wrapping up NFC title game conversation. You'll be at the link for Eagles Commanders on Sunday. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've been to every single playoff game. So BetMGM is giving you the day off, I guess, on Championship Sunday, huh, Christian?
Yeah, I mean it's tough when your team's in it. They know I wouldn't really be much help on that day if I was just working behind the counter here. I'd be having my eyes up on the TV. So yeah, fortunate to go. I was fortunate to go last week, which was very cool. My heart rate went up to 1 billion at multiple points, but I got some pretty cool snow videos, and it was cool being there in the snow. A nice snow game, watching Saquon run all over.
As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use promo code THELINES, that's the lines one word, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THELINES. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code THELINES when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire within 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THELINES and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. I was fortunate. I had Rams second half at +3, juiced a little bit of VIG. So I was just happy that LA scored a touchdown to make it a 6-point game, and then kind of gravy on top if they were able to win the game. But I'm happy for your sake that you got to see a win. And we'll see what happens on Sunday. Great analysis from behind the counter on this NFC Championship game. Now, over to the AFC title game as promised, starting off with player props and Travis Kelce. And in 5 games against the Buffalo Bills. And keep in mind, Kelce was plus money at some shops, and I believe BetMGM in particular, to go over 60 receiving yards in the divisional round. So he did that, went over 100 yards, scored a touchdown on that phenomenal play by Patrick Mahomes to essentially put the game out of reach. But in 5 career games against the Bills, and I think a few of those in the playoffs, 55-plus receiving yards in all 5 games, 80-plus receiving yards in 4 of the 5 games, 6-plus receptions in all 5 games, 9-plus targets in all 5 games. You see where I'm going here. 4 total touchdowns and either a touchdown or 80-plus receiving yards in each of the 5 games. And then to put the icing on the cake, he is just 3 scores away from topping Jerry Rice for the all-time NFL playoff touchdown record. So, just 2 days into conference championship weekend here, I am almost positive, even though we're still 5 days or so out from the AFC championship game, that Travis Kelce has taken a myriad of bets so far this week.
Yeah, you nailed it. I guess those stats are available all over the place because looking at the numbers, our most bet on player prop, specific player prop has been Kelce, receiving yards, on the over 68 right now, and then Travis Kelce receptions at over 6.5 is taking a ton of action as well too, and it is early, so these are already some pretty big numbers even from early on. So everybody's on top of that one. Another one that I saw too was Mahomes over rushing yards. It's another one that he tends to do more in the playoffs, or at least seemingly in big spots, he ends up with a big run. So that 23 and a half rushing yards for him is another one that I saw people hopping on.
And speaking to the point spread and the total, Kansas City up from a 1.5 to a 2 point favorite against Buffalo, total of 47.5. Anything stand out in either of those markets? Obviously, this line jumping out about a half point, still a dead number, though, or anything for the total, maybe, if been a little bit more interesting with that particular market.
Yeah, the total week is dropped down a point from 48 and a half to 47 and a half. Probably a little bit from last week, the fact that it was a couple more lower scoring games outside of that Commanders Lions game, of course. Um, Yeah, from this, we're not going to want the Chiefs in this one. We're going to want the Bills because we do have some liability on the Chiefs. I do want to throw out one other player prop that I saw was Xavier Worthy over 2.5 rushing yards. So they do tend to give him the ball at times for that. So we did see some of those. But from the books perspective, this will probably be a mixed game for us. I think we'll probably take pretty close to 50-50 action either way. But the book will definitely be still rooting for the Bills just because of a future standpoint.
Right. And you mentioned Bills Eagles would drive interest through the roof, assuming, well, with or without Josh Allen winning the MVP. But the fact that he is in that conversation in Buffalo, you have a major market, or at least in a major state in New York. But looking at Josh Allen and his player props, diving back into the prop market here, didn't have a big divisional round game against Baltimore. Now, Buffalo benefiting from those three Ravens turnovers and the Mark Andrews drop on the 2 point conversion. That's another conversation for another day. Unless you have something on Andrews props and how he was impacted, or how you guys were impacted from that standpoint. But what is the action looking like for Josh Allen so far in the AFC Championship game?
Yeah, I mean, per usual, even though he didn't have big flashy stats, he did still have two rushing touchdowns and ended up winning the game. So as usual, we were taking overs on his rushing yards, passing touchdowns. That's usually every week, but not as crazy as the Kelce ones. I'm sure it'll pick up as the week goes on. But yeah, at this point, pretty much everything to his overs.
And if we go back to the divisional round game, just if we want to attack Allen passing yards for a moment, Trent McDuffie against Nico Collins, it's worth noting, lined up across Collins on 22 of his 32 routes, so just below 70% of Collins' target share, essentially, or at least routes run. And McDuffie allowed 2 receptions for 42 yards on 4 targets. Most notably, his average target separation was just a single yard. So Allen could seemingly have another low passing yardage output, just when you think about who's across from Buffalo standout receivers in this game. And McDuffie, one of the best corners, if not the best cornerback in the NFL going right now. And Kansas City's pass defense really hasn't dropped off, even after losing one of their notable corners going back to last season. But we touched on maybe the exact Super Bowl matchup that would draw the most interest. But what's the best result if you look back at exact Super Bowl odds heading into the playoffs for BetMGM?
Yeah, so for us, we definitely would want the Eagles from that perspective. They're our best current futures outcome. When I look up our exact outcome book that we list, Chiefs to beat the Eagles is the worst one that we have from a liability standpoint. And then on top of that, Chiefs are the one team that we have left that we do have liability from a future standpoint. So we would like them knocked out. For us, the order of best outcome for us is Eagles, Bills, Commanders, than the Chiefs, because that's where our main liability is at. So that's why I was saying for us we want an Eagles Bills book Super Bowl just because that's good for us. We're okay either way from a futures standpoint, and we do think that will drive a good amount of handle too. We think Chiefs Eagles will too, but then we got a little bit of a sweat to work out there at that point if that's what ends up happening. And then again, yeah, from the other perspective, either option with the Commanders is still fine with us, but the Chiefs beating the Commanders probably from our perspective would probably be the worst thing that could happen to us at this point.
All right, so we'll keep that in mind and root for Christian's Eagles, not only as a fan, but I guess also if you care about BetMGM.
How convenient. Yeah, how convenient. They line up perfectly.
Exactly. Scandals all around. Just kidding. Don't want to get that started. Looking ahead to next season, though, Super Bowl odds. Because the Bears just hired one of the hottest commodities on the coaching market, not, well, I guess betting market per se, but Ben Johnson, the former Lions offensive coordinator, getting hired as the next Chicago Bears head coach. Chicago doing something right for once. Also reportedly going to bring in Dennis Allen as their defensive coordinator. I actually think that's a very underrated move, despite Allen's head coaching lack thereof prowess and struggles. More so as a head coach. He is one of the best defensive minds in football to me. Now, at some shops, Chicago down to 45-1 to win next season's Super Bowl. I don't think BetMGM has 2025, 2026 Super Bowl odds up just yet. But where do you expect those to open now that the Bears have a seemingly competent head coach to pair up with one of the most intriguing young quarterbacks in the league in Caleb Williams?
Yeah, so we don't list next year's odds until right around the end of the Super Bowl. Just multiple reasons we don't do that, but we do have a list of how we would set them at this point and what they'll end up being. And they did have a decent move for us from our back end perspective of we would have been around 80-1 or 66-1 or yes, 66-1. And then now I think we're going to end up dropping them. We would, if we opened right now, we would probably be at 40-1. I know there's some 45-1s out there, but we'd probably be down to 41. More from a perspective of, I know that I'm personally very high on that signing and that potential. The one thing that we tend to look for on from an MVP perspective in years past was always that sophomore quarterback making a jump from their freshman year. So this would be a spot for sure that you would look for something like that, where this is a guy coming off a Heisman, number one overall pick, and now seemingly getting a great coach with a potential great defensive coordinator. So we would expect that team to be a lot better, especially if they end up making some O-line signings or drafting from that side of things, because that was really where their big weakness was. And just, another thing that we'll tend to do is if we expect a lot of action on something like that, we do tend to trim them in a little bit more. And I feel like that will be a popular pick amongst long shot teams going into next year.
Yeah, interesting nugget too with MVP. You pair up one of the best offensive minds in the league, especially when you consider Jared Goff. Now, you can make the case Goff has improved a lot, or is that a byproduct of the two systems that he's played in under Johnson and formerly Sean McVay? And then you couple that with Caleb Williams and his talent level, seemingly much higher than Goff coming out of college. So, and the weapons that they have, assuming Keenan Allen does stay. I kind of like that look. Definitely worth thinking about, maybe marking down for long shot MVPs, not just long shots to win the Super Bowl with Caleb Williams in that market. But he is Christian Cipollini, lead trading manager at BetMGM. You can follow all the latest on BetMGM Sportsbook and liability and whatnot by subscribing to the YouTube channel, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. So for Christian and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, first off, good luck to your Eagles, Christian.
Yeah, thank you. That'll be, I will not be a happy camper if they lose while I'm there. So hopefully that works out, because it's obviously, like I said, twofold from my personal want and then the book's want too. So hopefully it all works out.
As a warm weather stan, I give you a lot of credit for standing out there in the snow or sitting out there.
That's football weather. Come on. Got to be out there in the cold. I want it cold. No domes.
I'll pass on that front, but good for you. Again, he is Christian. I'm Eli Hershkovich. Good luck with all your Chip Sunday wagers, and we'll talk to you ahead of the Super Bowl. So long, everybody.